can't adopt one style of leadership to get the best from all of those people. You really have to understand what makes them tick. So what won't come to mind, will I get injured or will I die? When it comes to safety, it's not just about the physical side of the safety, it's about psychological as well. If there is a lack of diverse thinking that's gone into the development of that, then it's going to be good, but it might not be great. Don't go with imposter syndrome, just set that aside. That would have saved me a lot of worry, I think.
Every leader has a story to tell, and the Safe Leader podcast uncovers the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. Join me, your host, Mark McBride-Wright, as we hear from business leaders, academics, entrepreneurs, and agents of change as they share their journeys of innovation, resilience, and transformation. Together, we explore how they embrace the principles of safe leadership, sharing, acting, feeling, and empowering to create safer, more inclusive environments for everyone. Keith Hanlon Smith is currently the Chief People Officer to the Rail Safety and Standards Board, the RSSB, where he oversees the Human Resources, Company Secretary and Facilities teams. Keith started his career in retail, where he first became interested in the positive impact human resources can have on organisations. He's worked in venue management, media, manufacturing and engineering businesses before moving to the not-for-profit sector. Keith is particularly interested in driving employee engagement through the development of healthy organisational culture. His current role at RSSB focuses evolving the organisation's people strategy by modernising the more traditional people practices. And RSSB has recently been recognised for its work in employee wellbeing and equality, diversity, inclusion and belonging. Keith lives in Brighton and spends his spare time walking on the South Downs with his pet beagle. Hello, welcome to this episode of The Safe Leader with myself, Mark McBride-Wright. And today's guest, we have Keith Hanlon Smith, who is the Chief People Officer at the Rail Safety and Standards Board in the United Kingdom. Keith, lovely to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, good, all good.
So is this your first time doing a podcast or have you done a few before?
We actually do some podcasts at RSSB, so we're really considerate about the way that we push our stuff out of the business, and podcasts has proved to be really popular. So I've actually done one for RSSB.
Fantastic. So today we're going to talk through about your experience as a Chief People Officer. You know, I love my guests to talk a bit about their career, what you've done, how you've got to where you're at. You know, the Safe Leader is all about the framework of sharing, of acting, of feeling, of empowerment. So, you know, any nuggets you've got along the way where you can shed insight in that. I will prompt you with some questions on that area. But I'm all about getting to know people's diversity story, getting to know people's difference. And you know, some things we can't see from the surface, from looking at people, and through sharing and through storytelling, we get to learn more about our peers. And when I was doing some research on you and looking at your background, you know, you've got a rich history working in HR across quite a diversity of different industries. So have you always been in human resources? You know, what first drew you to a career in HR, and how has that journey evolved to where you're at now?
Sure. Well, it's not a great story, actually, in terms of what first drew me to HR. Because I started off in retail. I was 15 years of age. I was a bit too young to be working at that point, but I just wanted to get out there and start earning. So I got my first job when I was 15, and the organisation that I was working with went through a major restructure. I've been there for about 6 or 7 years, and I don't think they handled the restructure particularly well. And the number of tribunals that came afterwards and the case law that it set
Oh,
kind of
right.
agreed with that as well.
Wow.
Now, I actually did okay through that restructure and came out the other side of it and kind of reflected a lot on how it had been handled. And what struck me more than anything else was that the HR function, or the personnel function as it was called back then, could have done a lot more to
Right.
handle that restructure and the change that came with it. Could have done it in a better way. And at that point, so by this point I was 21, 22, and I was thinking, well, I can't stay in retail forever, what am I going to do? And I kind of combined those two things together and said, well, why don't I go and work in HR? If I think it could be done better or differently, go do it. So I went back to university part-time and studied for my HR qualification, and was lucky enough to land my first HR job just at the point where I qualified.
Wow, that's fantastic. So that I'm a big believer in making informed decisions for, the subsequent course of your life. So that's still quite young, 21 to be moving it, to have had like a good 6 years under your belt of how not to do it. It's quite I guess you've maybe learnt a lot retrospectively thinking how that was done then and how you wouldn't do that now. But to have then experienced that firsthand, especially cases that went on to set case law, do you find yourself reflecting back to that point in your life in Kate, as things come up now and as you've evolved through your career?
Quite regularly, yeah. And I must say, sort of 21 years of age was quite some years ago, but I still find myself referring back to that time. I think what I learned a lot while I was in that role, I was a young line manager. I had a team of 8 people by the time I left there. And 21 years of age, managing a team of 8 people is tricky.
Yeah, can imagine.
But the thing I learned more than anything else in that role is that you can't adopt one style of leadership to get the best from all of those people.
Yes.
You really have to understand what makes them tick and really play to that. So I think it is important that there is a consistency to leadership approach, that you're very core, you hold a set of values and beliefs, but that actually you adapt to the team that you are managing and really understand them as people and what gets the best from them. And I still find myself referring back to that lesson that I learned all of these years later, definitely within a HR practitioner's role. I think it's really important.
So, Keith, over the years, you've worked in a few different types of sectors. And up to the position that you're in now, at the head of your profession, essentially, in the RSSB. I wonder if you could just talk us through the differences in the different types of sectors that you've worked in. And I'm particularly keen to hear your experience now of working in a sector which is quite a large employer of engineers and people in STEM.
Yeah, sure. So I think I found myself in a pattern actually of jobs. I've not had that many, I wouldn't say, but I got into a pattern of working for a longer period of time, 5 or 6 years in one organisation, and then making a mistake and only working there for a year, and then finding another place, and then maybe making another mistake. And I kind of got into that pattern. I said, well, what is it about those mistake years that why did you find yourself in that situation? What I know from those experiences is that I operate far better in organisations where their people are their true assets. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say, people are true assets, but actually, when I found myself working in organisations where their brand was their key asset,
Right.
that wasn't the environment that I particularly enjoyed working in.
Interesting.
So the organisations that I've really enjoyed working in have been ones where they really put their people first, over and above anything else. And I think that's why I've gone from the different organisations that I've been in. And so I started off in retail, as I've already said. Then I kind of entered the corporate commercial world. I was in media for a period of time, and then recognised the fact that actually I could take my commercial background and go into not-for-profit, more purpose-driven organisations. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic when commercial people come into not-for-profit, because they bring something with them that suddenly becomes really interesting in that context. And the first step of that was to go to the Carbon Trust, where I was there for about 5 years, and we knew we needed to change the funding model at the Carbon Trust. We were government grant funded, but we recognised that grant funding was going to fall away.
Yeah.
So we needed to commercialise our activities. So it was a really good place for me to be in at that time. We also internationalised the business at the same time and took us outside of the UK. So it was a really exciting period of time to be working there. Definitely from a people point of view, because we had to take all of those people with us on that journey. And then actually from there, I've moved on to RSSB, the Rail Safety and Standards Board. Some overlap, actually, purpose-driven organisation staffed with people who are really passionate about what they do, and around about the same size, actually. Different funding model, but still an interesting funding model, and definitely an organisation that puts its people first.
So how can you tell us a bit more about how the RSSB, like the role that it does within the rail sector and the interplay between, because it's not a brand that people may see come front to mind. It's not a public facing brand in the respect like a train operating company is, or Network Rail, who we see everywhere when we're out and about. So can you just help our listeners get some understanding of how the sector's set up?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I'll give you my elevator pitch after I've told you a little bit about what we do.
Sure.
So we've kind of got two aspects. So RSSB is the only organisation in the rail industry that brings the whole rail industry together. Okay. And the rail industry in the UK is quite fragmented. So you've got your train operating companies, Network Rail infrastructure managers, supply chain is massive as well. You've got freight operating companies. You've got your rolling stock owners, known as Roscos. There's a number of different entities within the rail sector. But RSSB, being formed after the Ladbroke Grove disaster back in 2000, we were formed in 2003. We were formed in recognition, really, of the fact that there was one entity that needed to bring all of those players together to work to a particular set of standards and to achieve a particular safety level. And so we do that now through standards development, through our safety work that we do. We do it through research and development, and increasingly so, we're working in the area of sustainability, and in particular as sort of data aggregators for the industry as well. So because our reach is right across the industry, we get a lot of data, and we took a decision a couple of years back now to say, right, how do we maximise the value of this data and play it back to industry? So we're doing a lot of work in that space as well. That's what we do kind of on a day-to-day basis, but I guess to bring that to life for people that may be commuters, and this was described to me. I didn't make this up. Unfortunately, I'm going to sort of borrow it from someone else. And they said to me, right, in describing what we do as an organisation, think about yourself as a commuter. You leave in the morning to get your train, and the things that are on your mind are probably, will it be on time? How much is the ticket going to cost me? Mm-hmm. Will I get a seat? They're probably the things that,
very true. Very true.
So what won't come to mind, hopefully, is will I get injured or will I die on the journey on the way? And RSSB really, at its core purpose, exists to make sure that you don't need to worry about safety on the rail network. That is being looked after on your behalf, and you can worry about those other things instead.
I see. Very interesting. So with, if we could just go into that a bit further then, in terms of like how you define safety and the expanse that it encaptures. I talk a lot in the book about sort of using that hook that engineers have, or people working in high risk industries, not just engineers, have in the relationship with safety and physical safety. And extending that into the psychological safety at work. It's not, from clients I've worked with, there's still a massive opportunity there to use that as a communication mechanism to then bring sort of equivalent parity of esteem between mental health and physical health, physical safety. So just how does the RSSB help clients in the rail community communicate and understand what safety means?
Sure, yeah. It's, what I do know after being with RSSB for about 7 or 8 years now, is that the whole area of safety is incredibly complex across the rail network. And I'm not going to pretend to be a safety expert when it comes to the rail industry. We employ some incredibly talented people to understand that side of things. But the things that I have picked up on is that, from a sort of physical safety point of view, obviously, you're dealing with train stock, you're dealing with the interface between the train stock and the platform, you're dealing with, platform journeys and the movement around the stations. And that's not even going into any of the detail about how trains actually work.
Yeah.
They need to be.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go anywhere near any of that. Because you're quite right in saying that actually, so when it comes to safety, it's not just about the physical side of the safety, it's about the psychological as well.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a fantastic team of human factors experts who really look at the people side of safety in the rail industry. And, decision making and, how job roles lend themselves to safe environments or not, as the case may be.
Yeah.
They look at things like health and well-being and fatigue. So the kind of people aspects of safety in the rail industry are obviously the ones that really catch my attention and I'm far more interested in. But it's incredibly wide-ranging and very complex.
And that's encouraging to hear that the RSSB, you have your own in-house human factors team. Is that it? Yeah? And so I guess standards development or taking lessons learned from other sectors and bringing that in is part of the role as well.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and they very much play a role in that in the standards development area as well. And I have to say, I mean, we're just going through a project at the moment of moving offices, so we're downsizing like a lot of organisations are. And we had a blank canvas when it came to the office that we chose to move to. And I was regularly tapping my human factors colleagues on the shoulder to say, hey, help us design a space that's going to get the very best from the space that we've got available from a human point of view about how we're creating a space that's going to be productive and psychologically safe and takes into consideration things like neurodiversity and different working practices and all of those things. So I'm very lucky to have that team in-house and available, and I've definitely been using their expertise on that.
That's great. So yeah, that's really encouraging to hear you as an HR leader tapping into the skill set within that team within your business. And it must be quite exciting for them to get to apply what they apply on projects outwardly to turn that on the inside and then look at, well, actually, we now get a chance to influence the environment of where we're going to be working. And yeah, that's exciting. So with you, with being a leader in an organization, then how do you, if we look at the RSSB as an employer, can you give some examples or advice to people who maybe have an aspiration to become on the C-suite of an organization? How do you get there? What steps do you take? How do you move around?
Well, that's an interesting question, actually. We, as part of our internal leadership program that we developed, we agreed that each one of the exco would do a masterclass, what we call a masterclass, and I got allocated how do you progress your career, and I remember preparing for that, thinking I don't really know what insights I can give on this. I do sometimes feel like I've been just in the right place at the right time when it comes to my career. Now, obviously, if I was kind of reflect on it properly, I'd probably say, well, no, there was some input from me on this. It wasn't completely by chance. But I guess what I learned in the early stages of my career, and it may have been a bit of a cheat, but there's a lesson in there all the same. I started off in HR in Earls Court Exhibition Centre. And it was a fascinating place to be. I really enjoyed my time there, actually. But it was my first HR role. I was very junior, and it was quite hierarchical. Was the
Right.
exhibition centre itself, but both in a kind of organisational way, but physically as well. So the CEO was on the top floor,
Oh,
and
wow. Right. Physically.
that's where HR was as well. And then there's kind of, I guess, the kind of lesser important you got. You went physically down floors until you were in
Wow.
the basement. Well, the engineers and the tradies were. Now, it just so happened that that's where my dad and my brother worked. My dad was the chief electrician. My brother was a carpenter in the exhibition centre. And so during my lunch break, I used to go from the fourth floor down to the basement and go and see my dad and my brother and say, "Hey, what's going on down here? What are the guys talking about?" And because it was predominantly guys back then, and what's playing on people's minds. And then I'd go finish my lunch break, go back upstairs, and go, "Well, I kind of know what we need to be focusing on as a HR team." Now it's a bit of a cheat, I admit. But actually, the lesson I took away from that is you don't have to have relatives working elsewhere in the
Yeah.
business to go out and say to people, "Hey, what's on people's minds?"
Yeah.
And to really understand what makes people tick. And that was a lesson that I learned quite early on. Is HR practitioners really need to be connected to the business
Yeah.
and really understand, what we do as an organisation, who we are as an organisation. What motivates and makes people tick. All of those things. I mean, having said, I'm not going to go into the complexities of rail network safety because I don't really understand it. You can only take that so far, but it's really important to try and understand as much as you possibly can about the organisation, and I think that makes you more effective as a HR practitioner.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. It does. And I guess life is a continual learning loop as well, isn't it? We're always developing. So what skills are you actively developing right now? Is there anything you've got an interest in to that you're developing? It doesn't have to be work related, is it something on the side? Like what are you working on?
It's funny that you kind of opened that question up for me because I was like, "Oh, what am I working on in a work context at the moment? I need to have a think about that." And then opening it up into a non-work context, well, I've got a dog, I've got a beagle, and if
Oh,
anybody knows
nice.
what beagles are like, you know that you are constantly
Yes.
dealing with them as a project.
Yes. We looked into getting Beagle was one of the breeds that we shortlisted, and then I did the research that you're alluding to, and yeah, we didn't proceed with it.
And don't get me wrong, I love him to bits, and he's a true character. He brings me a huge amount of joy, but he will forever be a project in terms of trying to get him to behave and make better choices. So that's something that's going on at the moment. In a work context, what have we got going on at the moment? We're particularly focused on our wellbeing strategy, our internal wellbeing strategy. So obviously we look after wellbeing for our members across the rail industry, but we also have our own wellbeing strategy, and arguably, we should be absolutely first class when it comes to wellbeing within the organisation if we're then going to take that out
Yes.
into the wider industry. So that is a real focus for us at the moment, and I'm learning a lot. We're lucky enough to have some wellbeing specialists that work in the organisation, and I'm working closely with them on how we evolve our wellbeing approach. So that's a real focus for us at the moment. We've come a long way on ED&I as
Yeah.
well. And that's been a really enjoyable experience, actually, because it's something that I'm quite passionate about personally. So there are two real focus areas for me at the moment. I said the third one is probably around future capabilities.
Okay.
It's trying to imagine what it will be, the workplace of the future might look like, and saying, well, how can we get best prepared for the capabilities that we're going to need within the organisation to bring that to reality. So those are probably the three key things that I'm working on at the moment.
Tell us a bit more about your EDI work. You said you found it really enjoyable. What's brought you joy from it?
Well, as I say, I mean, my starting point would always be it's something that I'm really passionate about. I think that there is something great happening in a lot of organisations at the moment when it comes to ED&I, because what I think we're seeing is a real shift. When I started work 30 odd years ago, if my maths is right, yeah, it probably is that actually. There was very much a culture that you checked your personal life at the door. That was a full-on expectation that you arrived at work having checked everything in your personal life at the door. And that was particularly true of certain groups of people as well. You know, some other groups of people had the opportunity to talk a little bit about what was going on outside of work. Some people didn't at all. And the shift that you see from then to now, I think, is fantastic. Because you know the whole idea of bringing your full self to work is something that I think is great. So it's something that sparks interest in me in any case. And I think in the early stages of our ED&I journey, we started to see some big wins quite early on, and that's always an exciting place to be, isn't it? When you can see the difference that you're making. So our journey so far, and we've taken a kind of 4-step approach to our ED&I journey, which was set the right conditions. So, you know, signal in all of the right ways that we want people to feel included. We want to recognise people's differences and different needs and different motivations, and celebrate those differences as well. But we want an equal playing field, and we want people to feel that equity, whatever that means to them. So set all of the right conditions was our first kind of step. We then invited external accreditation. That was our next step. So come and tell us how we're doing and how we're doing against other organisations. Where could we be doing more? Our third step was to ask our people how they thought we were doing, because it's always an important thing to say, we think we're doing okay on this, but what do you think? And then our fourth step was to check back on what's actually happening. So we've set the right conditions, we've got external accreditation, we've asked our people what they think about it, but what's actually happening on the ground? Is it really making a difference? And that's that fourth step. And I do like a bit of structure, so that structured approach to our ED&I journey has just been I've really enjoyed being part of that process.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you learn a lot through doing that, don't you? I always say your people are your best consultants, you know, and the external companies are just there to kind of provide that structure, you know, that leaders like you look for, or trusted third party coming in to help garner the insights, you know, that you need to help make your decisions. Do you find there's ever any reticence or pushback, or I often find with some clients that we've worked with, a lot of the power, by virtue of the representation of the sectors that we work with, are still predominantly white men, you know, and oftentimes us as a group have felt a bit disconnected to the ED&I movement in how it's evolved, you know. So is there any... do you find that? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Like, and what do you have a personal connection to EDI in terms of underrepresentation?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first part of your question was around pushback, and I can honestly say that the leadership team that I work with, are 100% bought into the value that ED&I programs, initiatives bring into the organisation. So I don't face any pushback from the leadership, and I think that's an important place to start.
Definitely,
you want your leadership team to really get it. You do sometimes come across pushback, though, but I think I take a step back in those scenarios and go, well, what's going on for that particular person in this particular scenario? And quite often I think it comes back to a level of I'm going to say discomfort, but actually what I mean by that is that, or unfamiliarity. I don't know
Yes.
how to deal with this situation, and so
Yes.
I'm going to just shut down a little bit.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to resistance, is what I think I see more often than not is just a shutting down rather than a resistance. It's I don't fully understand this situation that's in front of me, and therefore I don't want to lean into it.
Yep. Yep.
The second part of your question, do I feel particularly connected? Well, I do. I've already said, this is an area that I'm particularly interested in. There are certain aspects of me as a person that, to use a really horrible phrase, ticks the boxes.
Right.
That is a horrible phrase. I don't like using that at all, but I think you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And there's certain aspects of me as a person where I would like to think that I'm a true ally.
Yeah.
So both of those things together means that I'm bought in. If I'm not thinking about my personal experience, then I'm thinking about how I can help somebody who's had an experience that is quite often similar.
Yeah.
Even if the characteristics of that person or their background or the things that make them different to me is not something I've first-hand experienced. I'm not sure if that makes absolute sense, but
It does, and it's what part of the work that I do is to try and encourage those that may visibly look like part of the homogenous group, is where we are sharing our stories to be a lighthouse for others to then have permission to share, because you're absolutely right with that latter point there. You'll only ever have your own lived experience, and your lived experience is only ever going to be by definition who you are and the experiences that you put yourself to have. And by nature of how we operate our lives, we actually are surrounded by sameness. Diversity doesn't actually come into our everyday life usually. So we have to be proactive in acquiring learned experience, which is where that ambition and desire to be curious comes in, to push through that zone of discomfort, to then lean in. And I totally get it. People are uncomfortable and therefore they don't lean in. So we go from being active to then being passive. And I often find that a leader's willingness to do that is almost a function of the external political context or social justice movements of the moment. And sometimes that can be the thing that's then driving strategy or internal decision making. And I think you're absolutely right. DEI isn't going anywhere. It's only going to be here more and more. And so in that workplace of the future, we have to have our eyes on the horizon. Like what are the things that the current workforce and the future workforce are going to hold close to heart as a value set, as how we do our work, where we do our work, who we do our work with, ethics. It's just a whole melting pot of decisions that could take a business in many different directions.
it can, and I think it's about finding the why. And I think one of the things you just mentioned there is ethics, and for certain people that get it, it's an ethics issue. It's like, we want to do this because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But not everybody. For some people, you need to find a different sell.
Yes.
And I think for me, when I talk about diversity, really the way I would sell it in certain circumstances is, we can come up with an outcome, a product, a service, an approach, a strategy, and it will be good because we're good at what we do. But if there is a lack of diverse thinking that's gone into the development of that, then it's going to be good, but it might not be great.
Mm-hmm.
So where are the blind spots? If you used to get somebody in who's got a different way of thinking about these things to come in and add to or critique this or be involved in the evolution of it and the creation of it in the first place, it might look different.
Yeah.
So for me, sometimes the sale is where's our blind spots? Who's not in the room at the moment that would make a difference if they
Yeah.
were?
Yeah, the process of doing the engineering and then the output of the engineering on or the product, the service, on the communities. I totally get that. The aha moment for me when I set up Equal Engineers was I'm a safety engineer by background, and so I used to help clients. I didn't really do much work in the rail sector actually, but I did work in oil and gas and government services, defence, facilities management, and we put so much effort into reducing risk to as low as reasonably practicable, hazards, the likelihood of stuff happening, and then manage residual risk through certain measures and protocols and procedures and what have you. But I was I, the loss of life due to suicide broken down by occupation by the Office of National Statistics in 2018 showed that construction, manufacturing, and process industries had the highest rate of loss of life due to suicide. And I didn't believe the data, so we did our own research, masculinity in engineering, and we've done it twice. And in both data sets, once in 2018 and then once in 2021, we found 1 in 5 engineers reporting losing a work colleague to suicide, and 1 in 5 reporting suicidal ideation or self harm. And that number went up to 1 in 4 in 2021. And that was out of nearly 800 respondents. So quite a sizable number. It wasn't a small sample size. And that just really made me sit up because I'm like, well, hang on. If the intention of our inclusion belonging programs are bring in your whole self, be your whole self at work, well, clearly we've got a disconnect. Otherwise, if we were achieving that, the people who are at the extreme are having these thoughts would be able to be open and get the right support and advice. And ironically, it's the male majority group that are in that bucket, as well. And that is the whole point of inclusion and belonging programs, is to create cultures where you can be your whole self at work. So I often find we use that term, but it's a little bit hollow. We don't really give it meat for what it can mean to people who are not part of a minoritized group in their day-to-day lived experience. We kind of have to carve it out more for people in order to sell, and you shouldn't have to say sell, but in order to give the benefits of what the whole point of investing in these things is about, DEI, it's actually good for you as well, not just other groups, because if we do get it right, then maybe these rates will come down and we'll have more genuine connectedness between white, straight, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical men that represent a lot of the engineering and STEM profession. They'll feel anchored in something that connects them to it. And yeah, so I find that framing it in that way might be something that will be effective for your members or for people who've been a bit passive on the shelf. They're staying quiet. They don't want to lean into it, but they're also not being antagonists and
Sure.
stopping it. But they just never really felt that personal connection. When you get people feeling a personal connection, things will move faster.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, those numbers are shocking. They really do make you pause for thought about sort of what's going wrong and how can we change that?
Well, it's just you don't you don't want people being physically present but mentally absent when doing high risk maneuvers or driving a train at 120 miles an hour. That's or operating a crane lifting heavy objects across a construction site. So that I think that's the bluntest way to talk about it in terms of equivalency between a structure that the workforce already understand, because we've made a lot of progress in safety, and then extending that slightly to then reframe it to talk about the brain as an organ and giving it the same respect as the rest of the body, which we do in this system over here, but are we doing it over here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're absolutely right because it takes a lot, doesn't it? It takes a lot of energy to
Yeah.
compartmentalize and apply that demarcation between home life and work life if you feel you must.
Yeah.
It's another really interesting area. I was having this conversation just yesterday, actually, with one of my wellbeing specialists, and we were talking about the concept of equality or equity. Actually,
Yep.
what we were saying is, in our wellbeing journey, it's going to look different for different people, and we should be very tuned into that. Because we can roll out a program of initiatives that is going to really land with some people and not at all land with others, and that's okay. And it does remind me of this conversation we're having now is that there are some people, me included. I said earlier, I started off work where you checked your personal life at the door, and actually that stays with you for a long time.
Of course.
I think there's still people in the workplace now that say, I don't want to bring my full self to work. I've been conditioned to have this demarcation between home life and work life, and that sits comfortably with me. And so I think there are, different groups, aren't there? I think some people that are coming newly into the workplace, they have an expectation that actually those lines are very blurred.
Yes.
And they have an expectation from their employer that that is the way that we're going to get the best from them. We've got some people that are further on in their career who say, actually, just leave me be. I'm all right as I am. We've probably got this whole group of people in the middle that are saying, actually, if I now have the opportunity to do something different to what's been done before, I'm gonna really take that opportunity, and that can only be good for me.
Definitely. And I always caveat that when we do our training with, there's a slide that I use in our sessions. It's got an the iceberg model, biases and expression. You've got the tip of the iceberg that are things you can see on the surface. Then you've got the waterline, and then beneath the iceberg, you've got all this other richness that makes us who we are, things that are beneath our waterline that we can't see, life experiences, accents, where we've lived, etc., sexual orientation, disability, mental health, blah, blah, blah. And that waterline is an organization can consider that a proxy for how inclusive their culture is. And so the more inclusive and the more included people feel, the lower that waterline will be, and the more likely that people will be to be open about anything going on beneath their waterline, any turbulence. But an iceberg has buoyancy. It can move up and down, and that waterline can shift and move. And I always caveat that it's not about the removal of privacy. And we're now expecting everyone to be open about everything going on in their life, which is what some generations or some people may feel like they're now sort of being forced into, and actually they don't want to, they've never had to, we don't need to, let's just keep it the way things as they've always been. But it's very different working in a culture which is, look, we're here, we're ready for you if you need us, than one which is, don't ask, don't tell, we don't want to know, get on and do your job, you're here to work, park it at the door type thing. So I think that's the kind of shift. And that's where we can get some intergenerational tension sometimes with, we now have to blur the lines between everything in our life. But that's not really the case. It's about shifting the mindset and creating that tone as a leader, and through wellness and well-being programs that you run, that people know it's there in the background, and that the organization and leaders will have their back if they ever need to get support or talk to people. And that's an art form to create. It'll never be perfect, but that's the sort of, certainly my aspiration for organizations across engineering, because we don't have that as a culture across engineering right now. It's still playing catch up in quite a lot of senses.
I think that's absolutely right. It comes back to what we were talking about earlier. One of the first lessons I learned about people management was that one approach is never going to be right for everybody. That actually, and definitely sort of in the HR world, the real key is to create a culture whereby you recognise the fact that people need different things, and it's a bit lazy to take a one approach. One approach is going to solve all of this stuff. Just really recognising that the different people need different things at different times, and you need to be able to respond to that.
An example. I read a couple of posts on LinkedIn in the last week by Claire Baldwin, her name is. She's a disability rights activist, and she posted some really interesting stuff about the intersectional experiences of disabled women. And I think, when it comes to menopause treatment or breast cancer screening or having a family, and I think she as a disabled woman was sharing her experience of her different aspects of her identity and how they're affected and how they're received in those scenarios. And I am none of those things, and so to learn about this to learn about this lived experience on the world has really expanded my understanding. And so I guess the key is to be creating those moments of opportunity to expand your frame of reference. But then when you have it as a reference point, bring it into your decision making, bringing it into the ways where you create these user journeys for different wellness programs, and then make it a lived experience, a positive experience for the individuals, if they ever need to access anything, or they hear situations or scenarios being spoken about where they then see their personal lived experience reflected in the solution or the offer. So it then just all feels like we're included, I saw a statistic. I can't remember the number, and I should remember this number, but it's from a diversity stats agency, and they basically had broken down that of all the just the 10 protected characteristics in the Equality Act in the UK, the number of intersections that each one can have leads to I don't know, thousands and thousands of permutations of different lived experiences. I'm sure people that are good at maths can do that quick matrix or algorithm or whatever the word is. But we'll never know everything is the point. So being ambitious to be as well-rounded as possible is key.
Absolutely. I mean, just from this conversation, I do want to go away and check what the additional protected characteristic is, because I think there's only 9, not 10.
Oh, I've got it wrong. 9, not 10. There we go.
If they've added one, I need to know about it.
Well, I guess I've sort of added in neurodiversity to my library of pieces, that isn't called out in the Equality Act. So that's probably where my slip ups.
It's a really, really important one, and I think you're right. I was having a conversation just yesterday about sort of anti-discrimination legislation, protected characteristics, and I was saying, where do we think it might go? Let's just hypothesize a bit about what might, if we look at the history of anti-discrimination legislation and where it's been, where do we think it might go? And I won't kind of play back that conversation, but it does give you pause for thought. Say, well, what's next? One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is socioeconomic background.
Yes.
And I wonder if at some stage in the future that might fall into anti-discrimination legislation as well.
Yeah, who knows? I certainly think with the government that have come into power now, I don't think there's any risk of the Equality Act going in a different direction to a direction it could have gone had the previous government stayed in administration. So who knows? I actually live in Brooklyn now in New York. So, we've got the time of this episode, we're sort of 2 weeks away from the presidential election. So it's going to be really interesting to see the outcome of that and the impact that has on work over here and what organizations are doing. Because there has been a bit of a quietening down of commitments. Commitments are still there in the background, but vocally, externally, so I just feel like it's all kind of on pause at the moment. what organisations are doing. So, right, quick fire round questions. Okay. So, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I would say that would be from my dad. And my dad always used to say to me, "Don't go back."
What's your proudest achievement in HR?
I think it will probably be. I'm just going to go with where I am at the moment. I've got a fantastic team that I work with, and I'm so proud of them. And the culture and engagement levels across the organisation at the moment are the highest they've ever been. It feels like a great place to work at the moment, and I'm really pleased about that.
What's one skill you think every HR professional should have?
Humility.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon.
What's your go-to productivity hack?
Copilot.
If you could have dinner with any HR or business leader, past or present, who would it be?
Lucy Adams from Disruptive HR.
What's your favourite HR technology or tool?
It would be, I don't know, should I plug our engagement tool that we use at the moment?
Yeah.
We use Peakon, Workday Peakon. I have to say that probably has made the biggest difference to our employee engagement levels than any other tool I've ever used.
What's one thing you do to unwind after a long day?
Long dog walk.
What's the most exciting project you've ever worked on?
I think that probably would be. There's a few actually that pop into my head, but I would say the first one that popped into my head, that was probably the Carbon Trust. I really enjoyed changing that business funding model and the cultural change that came with it, and yeah, I really enjoyed that.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Oh, that's a real tough question. I wish I'd have prepared an answer for that one. Don't go with imposter syndrome. Just set that aside. That would have saved me a lot of worry, I think, if I hadn't have given that voice so much time.
Fantastic. Well, Keith, I've really enjoyed our chat today. It's been nice getting to know a bit about you, a bit about your experience, what you're doing now, and what you've got planned in the future. If people want to get in touch with you or find out a bit about what you're doing, how do they get in touch?
I'd say the easiest way is on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm very happy to connect with people.
Fab. We'll put a link to your profile in the show notes then, so people can reach out. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really happy to be involved.
Perfect. Well, I shall see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. You have been listening to the Safe Leader podcast, uncovering the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. If you have enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the Safe Leader podcast on your podcast platform of choice and get notified when a new episode goes live. Did you know that we also offer a full transcript on each of our podcast episodes? Check out my website, McBride-Wright.com. Here, you can also explore the training, coaching, and keynote speaking services I offer. And whilst you're there, why not join the Safe Leader community by subscribing to the Safe Leader Insights mailing list? Thank you for listening, and please come back and join us on a future episode.